We all know him, right? The face
Yeah.
on the penny, the guy who saw the U.S. through, well, its worst crisis, Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, all that. But, and I bet you've had this thought too, is that all there is to it? Did the textbooks maybe gloss over some stuff, like some serious behind-the-scenes maneuvering? I mean, saving the Union, that couldn't have been all sunshine and roses, right?
It definitely wasn't. And that's where this deep dive gets really interesting. We're going deep into Abraham Lincoln's secrets behind the Civil War. And let me tell you the picture that emerges. A leader under immense pressure, making huge decisions, but not always out in the open. Secrecy. It wasn't just a choice, it was often essential. So, our goal here is to peel back those layers, see those hidden dimensions of how Lincoln led during the war, and hopefully you'll come away with a way richer understanding of this, well, let's be honest, kind of legendary figure.
So right off the bat, let's talk about the political mess Lincoln was dealing with. It wasn't just North versus South, was it? It sounds like he had enemies everywhere.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The source paints a picture of a nation that was, well, shattered. I mean, yeah, the Confederacy breaking away was the obvious big problem. But Lincoln also had a ton of issues within the Union itself, his own party, the Republicans. Not exactly a happy family. You had different groups, all with their own ideas on how to fight the war, what they were even fighting for. And then, of course, you have the Northern Democrats. Lots of them were, shall we say, not Lincoln's biggest fans. They hammered him on his policies, basically how he was handling the whole crisis. So, yeah, every decision he made, it was like walking a tightrope.
And that tightrope gets even trickier when you think about the border states, right?
Yeah.
Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland. They were basically the linchpin of the whole thing, and Lincoln's approach to them was fascinating.
Right. What's really striking is how Lincoln dealt with those states. They were slave states, but they stuck with the Union. And the source digs into how Lincoln used some pretty clever tactics. He offered them political goodies, concessions, and sometimes he just, well, looked the other way on the whole slavery thing. Not exactly a morally pure stance, but it was all about keeping them on the Union side. It shows, I think, that sometimes leadership means making tough calls, even if they're a bit ethically murky. Got to keep your eye on the bigger goal.
Yeah, it really breaks down that image of Lincoln as this perfect, untouchable hero. He was a politician making hard choices behind closed doors, and sometimes those choices, well, weren't pretty. And speaking of those tough choices, suspending habeas corpus. That's a big one, right?
Huge. The source makes it clear Lincoln went ahead and, in a pretty hush-hush way, allowed the government to lock people up without trials. If they were suspected of helping the Confederacy, boom, straight to jail. The reason given. Putting down the rebellion, keeping things safe. It was wartime, after all.
But that had to cause some serious backlash. It sounds like a pretty blatant attack on individual rights.
Oh, yeah, it was a powder keg. The Democrats, anyone who cared about civil liberties, they went ballistic. They saw it as Lincoln grabbing power, taking a step toward, well, tyranny, really. And it's a debate we still have today, right? How do you balance security and freedom, especially when things are falling apart? It was one of the most controversial things Lincoln did, no doubt.
And this brings us to the, let's say, more shadowy side of things. We often forget, but the Civil War was a turning point for how wars were fought. And that includes intelligence work. This wasn't just about marching armies and big battles, right?
No way. The source is really clear about this. To win, you needed to understand your enemy. That's where spies and intel come in. And this is where Alan Pinkerton enters the picture. His Pinkerton National Detective Agency, it was like a prototype CIA working for the Union. They gathered intel on the Confederacy, their troop movements, their plans, and of course they were keeping Lincoln safe, sniffing out assassination plots.
Sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller. And the source mentions infiltrating groups in the North that were sympathetic to the South. That's some serious cloak and dagger stuff.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. These secret operations, they were all about figuring out how much support the Confederacy had up north and then, well, disrupting it. Lincoln understood that the real fight wasn't just on the battlefield. It was a war of ideas, of loyalty, playing out all over the country.
And then there's the whole thing about disinformation, right? Actually feeding the Confederacy false information. That's wild, and I don't think it's something that's talked about a lot.
It's fascinating, right? The source highlights how Lincoln was deeply involved in these disinformation campaigns. The goal was to plant fake intel, make the Confederates think the Union had more troops here, fewer supplies there, whatever would throw them off. And it worked. It shows that Lincoln really understood the power of information, of messing with the enemy's heads. He wasn't afraid to use every tool in the box, even if it meant being a little sneaky.
Let's shift gears now and talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. Everyone knows it as this, this monumental act of freeing enslaved people. But the source really digs into the strategic side of it, right? It wasn't just about morality.
Absolutely. Of course, ending slavery was a massive moral issue for Lincoln. But look at the timing of the Emancipation Proclamation. The way it was worded, it's clear he was thinking strategically too. The war was dragging on, and he needed a way to redefine it, both for Americans and for the rest of the world. By making it about ending slavery, he got huge support from countries like Britain and France, where people were strongly against slavery. That made it way harder for those countries to side with the Confederacy.
And the fact that it didn't apply to the border states or Union-controlled areas, that wasn't an accident, was it?
Not at all. By leaving those areas out, Lincoln kept the pro-slavery Unionists happy. He needed their support, especially in those crucial border states. It was a delicate balancing act. He wanted to weaken the Confederacy, but he couldn't risk splitting the Union in the process. And of course, the proclamation also meant that black men could join the Union Army, which gave them a massive boost in manpower.
It's easy to forget about the personal toll this war took on Lincoln. The source talks about the tragic death of his son, Willie, and how deeply it affected him and Mary Todd Lincoln.
It was a crushing blow. Losing Willie in 1862 really devastated both of them. The source talks about Mary Todd Lincoln's incredible grief, how it really took a toll on her mental state. And on top of that, she had to deal with whispers and accusations because of her Southern roots. People were suspicious of her, thought she might even be sympathetic to the Confederacy. It was just a heartbreaking situation, especially for Lincoln, who was already carrying the weight of the entire war on his shoulders.
And then there's the whole team of rivals thing, right? This cabinet full of big personalities, ambitious guys, all wanting to make their mark. Keeping that group in check must have been a full-time job.
Yeah, it was. The source really emphasizes this. Lincoln's cabinet was a mix of some serious heavy hitters. Seward, Chase, Stanton, all brilliant, all driven, and not always seeing eye to eye. Lincoln had to constantly manage their egos, smooth over disagreements, and sometimes, well, he just kept them in the dark. Like with the Emancipation Proclamation, he didn't tell several of them about it until the last minute. He knew there would be pushback, leaks, maybe even attempts to sabotage it. It shows just how skilled he was at managing people, keeping them focused on the goal, even when they were at each other's throats.
And let's not forget the constant threat of assassination. I mean, that had to weigh on him constantly.
Absolutely. The source is clear about that. The assassination by John Wilkes Booth, it wasn't a one-off. Lincoln was a target throughout his presidency. There were tons of threats, most of which the public never even heard about. I mean, think about it. He had to sneak into Washington for his first inauguration, disguised, in the dead of night. They were worried he'd be killed in Baltimore. That's how serious it was.
It's strange, though, right? His security detail seems so small compared to what we see today. The idea of Lincoln just walking around Washington, no guards, it's almost unthinkable now.
I know, it's wild. He had a few soldiers, some informal bodyguards, that was about it. Compared to the security around modern presidents, it's night and day. But that was the reality then. And despite the danger, Lincoln wanted to remain accessible to the people, which is, well, pretty remarkable.
Even Lincoln's decisions about his generals, they reveal a lot about his leadership. And some of those decisions were incredibly controversial. Firing General McClellan, for example, that's still debated by historians.
Oh yeah, McClellan. He was popular with the troops, but Lincoln wasn't impressed. He thought McClellan was too cautious, too slow to act. And while the source doesn't get into every detail, it's clear that Lincoln kept a lot of his frustrations with McClellan private. He didn't want to undermine the Army's morale. And the way he chose Ulysses S. Grant to lead the Army, that was another example of careful, quiet maneuvering. He knew there would be opposition to Grant, so he played his cards close to his chest.
And then there's Grant's strategy of total war, right? Sherman's march to the sea, all that.
Yeah.
It was brutal, and a lot of people, even in the North, were horrified.
Yeah, it was. Total war. It meant targeting everything, not just armies, but resources, infrastructure, even the civilian population. It was incredibly destructive, and it did cause a huge uproar. But the source suggests that Lincoln, while he might not have said so publicly, he supported Grant's approach. He knew it would be bloody, but he also knew it might be the only way to break the Confederacy for good.
So when you look at the whole picture, all these secrets, all this maneuvering, it's clear that the Lincoln we learn about in school, it's just a small part of the story.
Totally. The source leaves you with a lot to think about. What else was going on behind closed doors? What other secrets did Lincoln keep, even from his closest advisors? There are still so many questions about how he would have handled Reconstruction, about his views on civil liberties during wartime, and so on. It's a reminder that even our greatest heroes, they were complex, flawed human beings. They made tough calls, and sometimes those calls were, well, less than heroic. But in the end, Lincoln's goal was to save the nation, and he did whatever it took to make that happen.
A leader for sure, but a more complicated figure than we often realize. So for everyone listening, here's something to chew on. We've seen how secrecy and strategy played such a huge role in Lincoln's leadership. And that makes you wonder, right? How much are we missing when we look at other historical figures, even leaders today? What's going on behind the scenes? What are the tough choices they're making? The things they're not telling us? It's a good reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.